The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the seventh and final day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico, a very snowy day. And I'd like to share just a little bit more of Huang Po's teachings. And then I'd like to share something of the contemporary master Sheng Yen, who in some ways he's not contemporary in that he died in 2009 of kidney failure, but he was remarkable in the Chinese Chan lineages. He has both Rinzai and Soto sanctions, transmission, and he has a very interesting story, having been born into an extremely poor family in southern China. But let's first share Huang Po's teaching one little bit more, because his teaching is quite similar to what Sheng Yen has tried to point to as well. When thoughts of the past cannot be taken hold of, that is relinquishment of the past. When thoughts of the present cannot be taken hold of, that is relinquishment of the present. When thoughts of the future cannot be taken hold of, that is relinquishment of the future. This is called utter relinquishment of the triple time. And in the Diamond Sangha, not in the Diamond Sangha, but related to the Diamond Sangha, there was a monk who was an expert on Diamond Sangha or Diamond Sutra, and he was traveling. And apparently in China in those days, there were worthy elderly women who had wayside stands that sold treats. What are known in Japan as monju, which are the little pounded rice cakes filled with sweet bean sauce or some other version. At any rate, this eminent monk, who was highly regarded for all his work on the Diamond Sutra, he'd spent 30 years studying and commenting on the Diamond Sutra. And he had all his notes in a pack on his back. And this elderly lady says, what have you got in your backpack? And he said, with some evidence of egotism, those are my commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. And she said, oh, the Diamond Sutra. Well, I will give you a free rice cake if you can answer this question. If you're an authority on the Diamond Sutra, it should be easy. In the Diamond Sutra, it talks about past mind does not exist. Future mind does not exist. Present mind does not exist. Which mind, then, will you be conversing on the Diamond Sutra? And of course, it flummoxed the monk, at which point he decided, because he had been headed down to see another master and best him in his work. In fact, I think it was the sixth patriarch, because he was from the south, and there was still almost a war, really, between the northern school and the southern school of Zen in China at the time. And he was headed down there to show that the Southern school was nothing. And when she asked him those questions, which mind will you refresh your mind with? Because the omonju were in Chinese known as mind refreshers, these little rice cakes. And when he couldn't answer it, he realized maybe there was something he didn't know. And so he burnt his notes and went and asked the sixth patriarch to be his students. He was a wise man, learning words to describe awakening or our true mind or the path of Zen have very little use. What is most important is that we go deep within ourselves and realize the truth. Realize who we really are. And let go everything that stands in the way. Letting go, not getting rid of. As we let it go, it'll naturally disappear. We don't have to try to make an effort to get rid of whatever it is. And as a matter of fact, it's so common for relatively new students of Zen to complain about constant thoughts in their heads as they're doing Zazen, particularly in Sesshin. And in the past, we've been told to cut them. That's not actually accurate. It's cutting our attachment to the thoughts. And the more we try to push them away, the more we try to get rid of them, the stickier they become. Rather, to sink down into this wordless search. And eventually the thoughts will just die out. So Sheng Yen. Let's go back to Hakuin first. Hakuin, who was an amazing Zen master at a time when Zen was not really in very good shape in Japan. And he was very concerned about what he called the Silent Illumination folks who would apparently misunderstand what Silent Illumination means, because Sheng Yen was a master in teaching Silent Illumination. And it's a very alive practice. It is not one where, as Hakuin would say, you enter a cave of dead sitting. It's very alive. And there are many, many books that he has written that can guide you into his way of teaching. As I said, he was born into an extremely poor family. His father rented land next to, I think, the Yangtze River, but I'm not sure which, actually, to cultivate and raise food on to sell. That left nothing for the family to eat. And so Sheng Yen, being the youngest child of the family, was tasked with, even from the time he was 3 years old, scrounging for weeds wherever he could find them. And that is what the family ate. It didn't help his health any. And as he grew older, a little bit older, his parents began to get quite concerned about it. He was considered someone who was missing a couple of beats in his head, considered, well, what they were going to do with him when he was 13 was marry him off to a girl in the neighborhood who also had some mental deficiencies. His mother was a devout Kuan Yin devotee, and from time to time, a master from a local temple would come and visit her. And one day when he learned that they were going to marry him off to this young girl, the master said, why not just send him to me? And so they did. And now Sheng Yen was able to eat actual real food. And although it didn't happen initially, he was able to grow much more healthy. In the very beginning, it really affected his ability to do what was called for in the practice of that temple, which was to memorize the sutras. He just couldn't do it. And at one point, in desperation, he did 500 prostrations before the figure of Kanon or Guanyin, imploring her to help him memorize these sutras. And it worked. Of course, modern day science would likely say that the exercise benefited his brain significantly. And so he was able to memorize those sutras more readily than he could in the beginning. And that, of course, combined with a decent diet. When he was 6, this was before he was sent to the monastery, there was a huge flood on the river, and the land that his father was farming was washed away. So suddenly they had nothing, no way of earning a living. It doesn't really tell what his father did at that point, but Sheng Yen himself remembers walking beside the river, which had, of course, flooded significantly and killed countless people, and witnessing the dead bodies floating down the river. He was in the temple practicing and becoming more and more aware and able to practice. And right about that point in time, the communists started moving south, and he had to flee to further south until he got to the ocean. And then the only alternative, other than becoming a communist, which was going to wipe out his monkhood, was to join the nationalist army and be sent to Taiwan. And that's exactly what he did. But it wasn't a piece of cake. As it turns out, once you joined the nationalist army, it was a life endeavor. And once he got to Taiwan, he wanted to go back to being a monk. It was deeply embedded in his psyche to be a monk. And it really wasn't possible to do that. In fact, deserters were shot. There was no middle way. You either were in the army, or if you tried to leave, you were shot. But he used to spend weekends at a temple, a Buddhist temple, practicing. And the wife of one of the generals began to notice him and interceded with her husband to allow him to leave the army. And he was able to re-up becoming a monk. Very unusual for people in his situation. He wrote in his autobiography, Footsteps in the Snow, that there was a lot of misinformation in Chinese Chan, or Chinese Buddhism, period. And he set about trying to learn the real stuff. And in fact, eventually went to Japan and got both a master's degree and a PhD at Risho University, which is Rinzai, university in Japan. And Mitra-roshi met him then because he also became a student of another one of Daiyun Sogaku Haradoroshi's Dharma successors. Mitra-roshi had a high regard for Sheng Yen, and they remained friends until they both died. And of course, Sheng Yen died. Well, I think he survived Mitra-roshi. I don't remember exactly when Roshi died. It was a long time ago, but Sheng Yen did a lot of extended retreats on his own, mastering his practice, deepening his practice, and eventually established any number of practice centers, including one in Queens, New York, another one in Pine Bush, New York, and a couple in Taiwan. I went and stayed in the city temple when I had to go get my cultural visa when I was going to be living in Japan at Sogenji. And back then you had to do that. You had to leave the country and apply for your cultural visa outside the country. And then they would either grant it or not, and you'd return to Japan. And then at the border, if you were granted the visa, they would let you know how long you would be able to stay. So it wasn't a giveaway. It was very interesting. The monks and nuns at the time had been tasked, Sheng Yen, who was in the States at the time, had been tasked with moving the city center into the mountains. The Taiwan government was interested in removing any possible objections to how they were ruling by causing all the Buddhist sects to have to build in the mountains. So they were remote. And I was fortunate enough to be able to travel with the nuns and the monks of Sheng Yen's city temple as they went about Taiwan and visited 5 different temples in order to sort of get a sense of what is being built and what they could build. It was very, very interesting. And Buddhist temples in China and Taiwan are huge, absolutely huge. There was one temple where 500 people were receiving the precepts in a courtyard. There were many courtyards. And the courtyard was so big that they were all standing far enough apart that they could have touched fingertips to fingertips with their arms outspread. So, and huge buildings where 50 nuns or 50 monks in a given room would be able to stay, and multi-story buildings so that they would have easily thousands of monks and nuns staying at the time. It was quite amazing. Sheng Yen was deeply fond of the silent illumination type of practice. He called it shamatha vipassana because it's about stilling the mind and then allowing the mind to be curious and gain insight. It's not an easy practice to do correctly. And I think this is why Hakuin was so upset about that practice, because people were not doing it properly. They were hiding away in some cozy little place in their mind instead of really having it be an actively dynamic practice. And let me share a little bit about what he says about this practice. Sheng Yen also taught koan practice centered on what is known as the huado, which is the nub of the koan. In the case of does a dog have the Buddha nature, it is mu. That is the nub of the koan. And to work on huado, you simply dive into this huado until it reveals itself to you. So I'm sharing now from a book called The Method of No Method, The Chan Practice of Silent Illumination by Chan Master Sheng Yen. The essence of intrinsic selfless wisdom, free from contrived effort and intentionality. This is the practice of silent illumination. And he quotes an ancient Chinese master, Hongzi. It cannot be practiced nor actualized because it is something intrinsically full and replete. Know that no other things can defile it. It is thoroughly pure to its depth. Intrinsic wisdom responds to conditions. Though quiescent, it is resplendent. Originally, one does not need a hairbreadth of an external object. Clearly, this is a matter to be found within one's own home. Let's get to where he he's talking about the practice of silent illumination, not the realization. He says, well, people may become attached to these stages as if they were markers of spiritual progress. In reality, the silent illumination of Master Hongzi does not fall into stages. Master Sheng Yen devised these stages as expedient means. Students of the way do not say that there is a difference between samadhi, coming first, and then producing prajna, being wisdom, of course, and prajna coming first and then producing samadhi. They are like a lamp and its light. If there is a lamp, there is light. Without a lamp, there is darkness. The lamp is the body of the light. The light is the function of the lamp. The name may be two, but in essence, they are basically one and the same. He talks about how to start the practice of silent illumination. This is kind of a funny thing to share with you on day 7, but I'll do it anyway because some of you are actually on the path anyway. It's about, and the instructions are just as relevant for silent illumination as they are for any other Zen practice. It's about profoundly relaxing the body. And this is the first instruction with regard to doing Susokan, the extended out breath also. When our body is totally relaxed, then there's nothing biting at it, I guess you would say. And we can sink deep down. And the relaxation is about sinking deep down with muscles relaxed and so on. And then when we have relaxed sufficiently, we can begin silently opening to we don't know what. That sense that there's something, even though it can't be called a something. This, in a nutshell, is how to do it. And that's also how to do our regular Zen practice. So there's another comment by him. And this is titled Extending Practice to Life Habits. You can also integrate these principles into all your activities. Just as when you sit in meditation, you just sit. When you sleep, be aware of the totality of your whole being going to sleep. When walking, you first walk. When you eat, you are right there, just eating. Plunge your whole life into what you're doing at that very moment and live that way. So we train ourselves to engage our whole being in what we are doing, whether sitting or eating. You're not engaged in discursive wandering or deluded thoughts. All of you, environment, body, and mind, is right there. Whatever you do, whatever the task of hand, your whole life is there in that moment. And we so often multitask, partly to avoid being there, sadly enough. But if we train ourselves to truly be 100% in whatever we are doing, it is amazing the richness of that experience, the subtle joy of that experience. Some people may interpret plunging your whole being into the practice or into the task at hand as a very tense approach. This is incorrect. By putting your whole being into whatever you're doing, you are also being relieved from doing anything else at that moment. Therefore, when you're doing that one thing, that is all you have to care about, and you can do it in a very relaxed manner and attitude. In this light, you will better understand the meaning of engaging your whole being in the present task. This is the relaxed and reposed attitude to practice. Some years ago, when I was at Sogenji, Hogen asked the Roshi, we were having tea, said, you know, in the morning I get up and I do my zazen, and then I go to the office, and there are so many things calling on me that have to be done. And I begin to get all tense about it. I would like to know how you take care of this, Roshi. And Roshi said, in essence, the same thing. He said, when I am doing anything, I'm only doing that one thing. I'm not thinking about what I have to do next. I'm not thinking about what I just finished. I'm only doing that one thing. And when that one thing is done, then I'm only doing the next one thing. There's no chance for attention to develop when we live like that. Yet most of us don't. We get up in the morning and a whole flurry of thoughts flies into our head about what we have to do, and confusion about which to do first, and will we be able to get it done under the schedule, and so on and so forth. Whereas if we would simply give ourselves to each moment solely to the whatever we're supposed to be doing in that moment, then it's very different. And then I think there's one more thing I wanted to share with you. Impermanence is a fundamental teaching in Buddhism that you can use to attune and refine your mind. There are three aspects to impermanence to understand: impermanence of the environment, impermanence of the body, and impermanence of the mind. Without considerable practice, it is difficult to directly experience the transient impermanence nature of your mind. It's much easier to begin by understanding impermanence in the environment. Through gradual steps, you can come to understand the impermanent nature of the environment, the body, and the mind. The environment is constantly changing, and your body changes with it. As the environment moves and changes, your body also moves and changes. Since there is no fixed, unchanging reality in the external environment, your body, which is part of the environment, is also not fixed or unchanging. And as the body moves through the environment, it will cause your perception of the environment to change too. The body is constantly going through changes. So when you experience physical discomfort or pleasure, there's no fixed nature to that feeling. Yet we try to hang on to the nice feelings and get rid of the not so nice feelings. The physical body also feels hunger, thirst, and other sensations. All of these are also transient, and they too will change along with the body. All of these changes impinge on your body as sensations and thus influence your mind. Understanding all this gives you a point of entry into the practice through becoming aware of your own sensations of change around you and in you. And this is a wonderful point to focus on in practice. Sheng Yen clearly had let go of his body. He was in renal failure, kidney failure, and his students urged him to go for a transplant. But he said, no, there are people who need it more than I. And at one point, they shipped him off to the hospital, but when he got to the hospital, it was clear that it was not going to be of any use. And in the end, he died on the way back home in the ambulance. No attachment to his body. It's something to consider. So in this last day of Sesshin, you've just heard some really important instructions about becoming one with whatever it is you're doing in any given moment, and how this will further your practice and also enrich your life. It's not so easily done, particularly not in this day and age. There are so many jokes about people, having dinner together and they're both texting. So they're not really engaged with each other. They're engaged with their little cell phones, and people doing bizarre things because they were not paying attention to what they were doing. There's a photograph or a movie of a woman who was busy with her phone texting, and she walked right off the end of a dock into the water. And some other things. They're funny on the surface, but they're sad, because when we are not paying sufficient attention, and you could say, well, she's paying attention to the phone, but then she should be sitting down, only paying attention to the phone. If she's walking and working with the phone, she's dividing her attention. How can we become more focused, more relaxed, more let go in our life, and thus more able to do our practice? We carry around a great burden of assumptions about ourselves, about our history, about what we had happen as children, and so on and so forth. And it's sad. A certain amount of that really does need to be worked on psychologically if it's blocking us, but sometimes we assume it's more impactful than it is. At any rate, on this final day of Sesshin, pretty much everybody has gone deep. There's been some significant insights And don't get excited about what that may mean. And of course, the most important thing is to keep going. To keep going. And never to cease, really. Because it becomes more and more amazing the deeper you go. And it's also important for people around you, because the more let go you are, the more they are able to be at least feeling that embrace of let go-ness. It makes a big difference in lots of people's lives. So dive back in and don't let up, and just keep going with that practice. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.